Hey guys, how's it going? Today I'm starting some herb seeds to grow in our kitchen, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to run through some of the steps on how you can get your herb seeds started, as well as some tips on how to keep the plants looking happy and healthy and full, which can be a little bit tricky inside for some of these plants that typically like to live outside in a really sunny location. But it can be done so that you can harvest a lot through these winter months. It's kind of the perfect time to start this project because I know a lot of us are craving growing something, planting something, and then also craving those fresh garden flavors. So of course there's a couple different ways you can start your herb plants. If you can find a pre-grown plant like this one right here that's already been started, you can see it sitting here in a little soil plug. This is a basil plant. That's definitely the easiest and fastest way to go about it, but very rare in the winter months can we find nice looking herb plants. This one I found in the produce section of our grocery store, and sometimes I'll run across a bunch of pre-potted herbs in the produce section. Like, I'm trying to think of all the ones: rosemary, thyme, oregano, marjoram, dill, cilantro. I've seen all of those in like little pots or little plugs like this. But right now all the stores have our basil plants. So most of the time in the winter we are looking at starting seeds. So today I have several seeds I want to get started. I've got a bouquet dill right here, which I'm actually making a roast recipe tonight. It's a Persian-inspired beef stew that calls for dill. I've got a parsley, which this one is really good for like low light situations. We've got lemon balm here, common sage, Greek oregano, basil, which a lot of guides, like indoor herb growing guides, say basil is hard inside, and I find it to be one of the easiest herbs to grow inside. That's just personal. And then I've got thyme here. So I think I want to break this up into sections because I do the best when information is compartmentalized. So I want to talk about things like how to choose the best type of herb for your growing situation, what kind of light to put them in, how to pot or plant them, what temperature they like, how they want to be watered, fertilized, pruned, and so forth. So the first section is how to choose the right herbs for your growing situation, because not all herbs like to be grown inside, and even the most experienced gardener will have issues growing things like lavender, stevia, tarragon. Those are three off the top of my head I can think of that I've struggled with throughout the past. If you've had success with those and found the sweet spot, which sometimes you can find that is awesome. It's always worth the experiment though. It's fun to gain knowledge and education, I guess. But if you know that kind of going in, that some herbs like it more than others, especially if you're a beginner gardener, then it can be less discouraging. Most herbs will want to be in the sunniest spot you can give them in your home, unless you're providing them with supplemental lighting with a grow light, which is what I'm gonna have to do. But there are a few herbs that can handle a little bit lower light situation, and those are chives, parsley, and sometimes mint. Can handle a little bit lower light. So if that's you, I would start with one of those three or all three of them and give those a shot before moving on to something that maybe wants a little more sun. And those herbs that want a ton of sun are rosemary and basil, thyme, oregano, marjoram. I mean, most of the things that I'm planting today, other than the parsley, want to be in super bright light. And that brings me to point number 2, which is light exposure. And because most herbs want a ton of sun, you want to put them in a south-facing window. That is the best location you can put them. You can use a western or an eastern-facing window as well, because they'll either get a block of morning sun or afternoon sun, but a south-facing window typically gets more of the sun throughout the day, so that is ideal. If you don't have that kind of situation and you don't have a window, positioned that way, you can provide supplemental lighting, which is what I'm going to be doing, because I'm growing these in my kitchen, which is a north-facing window that's underneath a large awning. So the window itself is even set back from where the light, even the indirect light, hits. So it's a pretty dark room. And if you're using grow lights, I usually run them for about anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and it keeps the plants really happy. And if your plants are not receiving enough light, you'll know there are a few signs you can look for. The first being stretching. Your plant will start to elongate. It's a very easy sign to spot. So the stem will start to get really kind of long and lanky, and there'll be more stem area between sets of leaves. And then you'll start noticing some of the leaves will yellow. They'll start to drop off. The plant won't look very healthy. It won't be growing very nicely. So those are all signs that, like, hey, I need to move my plant to a spot with more light, or I might need to purchase a grow light to get these things to do well. It's also a good idea to rotate your plants if they're not under a grow light. Rotate them a quarter turn about once a week, and that way they won't continually reach for the light in the same pattern, so that they can maintain a better shape overall. So the next part is the actual potting and planting part of this project. If you have a already grown on plant like this one, you can use just regular potting mix, which I have down here on the ground, and we're gonna go ahead and pot this one up. So I'm just using a terracotta pot here because I like the look of terracotta. I don't put anything in the bottom of the container at all to aid in drainage or anything like that. We're just gonna use the organic potting mix, and we're just gonna pot it up. It's gonna be a happy plant here in a minute. Okay, so I've got it completely full of the soil except for this little well that I've made in the center, and that's where we are gonna put the root ball. Like this. Then we'll pack some soil around it. And then once I get it into the kitchen, I'll water it in, but it's going to be underneath this grow light from this point on. It looks very happy and it smells amazing. And then of course the next way is starting seeds, which is a completely different method. So let me get set up for that one. So there's basically just an extra step involved. Well, more than that, it takes a lot longer. But we're gonna be starting these seeds in seed starting mix rather than regular potting soil because this one is loftier. It's easier for the roots to form and establish rather than try to poke through like heavier soil blends. So we're gonna start them in this in a seed starting tray, and then eventually we'll bump them up into the rest of the terracotta pots, which I've got, I don't know if you can see them, but I've got a stack of terracotta pots that I will be potting these up into probably in a few weeks. I already have some seed starting mix in here. I'm gonna top it up a little bit, and we wanna pre-moisten the soil just to where it's barely damp. Pour a little water in. Okay, so now I'm just gonna mix it up and I'll show you when I get it to the right consistency. Okay, so this is perfect, look at this. I can gather up some of the soil, I can squeeze it, no water comes out of it, but it still kind of holds its form like that. And the reason why we do this is because when I put the soil in the seed tray and then put the seeds in it and water it in, it's already kind of settled in a way, and so the seeds don't dislodge everywhere, and it's much easier to keep watered. All right, so I'm gonna set this aside, I'm gonna grab my seed tray. So I'm gonna be using one of the self-watering seed trays that I like so much. In fact, you can see a whole light system behind me that's outfitted with these same trays in preparation for flower seed starting season. But this is what it is. It's called a Grow Ease Seed Starter Kit. And I'll explain kind of how it works. I'm not gonna use all the parts today, but we've got the reservoir right here, just a plastic watertight tray. And then we've got a platform right here that you set down in the bottom, and a capillary mat. So you put that mat on top of the tray, and then it folds down into the water on one side. So the water will wick up on this side and it'll travel across the mat, and then you can set your tray that's been planted on top of it, and the water will wick up from underneath and keep your tray really fairly moist. And it cuts down on the amount of work you have to do in terms of watering tremendously. Now, I usually don't use this part until my seeds are up, like my seedlings are up and they've formed like a fairly nice looking plant and a nice looking root system, because I want the roots to reach a certain distance down so they can actually utilize the water. Until then, I usually top water unless the specific seed tells me not to do that. And you can usually find that information on the packet. I'm also not going to be using this today because I'm going to be setting this on top of a seedling heat mat, which I have here. And this is totally unnecessary, but it does heat the soil up a little bit and helps my seeds germinate faster. So it's one of those things, kind of like a grow light, that once you invest in it, you have it forever, and it's so helpful. And then the last piece is this dome right here, and I think that's why I like this system so much, because you get all the pieces you need. So we will be utilizing that today. The dome will set right over the top. It'll keep humidity levels really nice, and it'll keep the amount of watering down a little bit too, because it'll keep moisture in. So let me fill up all of these cells. I don't know if I already said there's 24 cells here, which is way more herbs than I could ever fit in this little light system that I have here. But I figured I may as well fill up the whole tray, and then I can give them to friends and family, the ones I don't need. So let's do that. And I usually have a potting tray on my table to help kind of contain the mess, but it makes it a little bit hard to see. So we're just gonna make a big old mess. Okay, now I'm gonna tamp it down a little bit, eliminate some of the air. We don't want it to be really firmly packed, but just a little bit, so we can know if we need to top up any of these cells. The edges usually tamp down pretty far. Now, if you have mixed up way too much soil, it's totally fine. Let it sit out for a day or two and maybe stir it once or twice in the meantime and let it dry out a little bit before you put it back in the bag. Because if you put wet soil back in your bag, that can create mold and maybe some fungus gnat issues, things like that that you don't really want to encourage. So just let it dry out a bit. You can totally use it again. So now we're going to plant it. It's very easy. You just want to make sure you follow the instructions on the back of the seed packet. So like for this lemon balm, it says the seed planting depth is 1/8 of an inch. So, you don't want to go very deep. For our parsley here, it's 1/4 of an inch. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to mark all of the cells where I plan to put everything, and then I'll get all of the seeds in so I don't accidentally get these confused since I have so many going into the same tray. I prefer to use plastic labels hands down in a situation like this. I know it's tempting to want to use like popsicle sticks or wood labels because they look so nice, but they will absorb water and get moldy and your marker will wear off so fast it's not even worth the trouble. So I typically like to either use metal or plastic. So I'm just going to pop my labels down in here. Let's see, I have to decide how many of each one I want to grow. Definitely the most of basil. And I think I'm going to do sage. I'm only going to do 2 of sage because sage is not my super favorite. And then probably just 2 of oregano. So that's how we'll do it here. So dill first, 1/4 of an inch deep. So I'm just going to make a little indent with my finger. And you can see like all of these seeds are going to be just so super tiny. Typically I'll just scatter a few seeds, maybe 3 or so in each cell, and then cover them over. Parsley will be your slowest grower out of all of these for sure. But it's also the most cold tolerant. Like parsley is actually a good perennial to put outside. Basil, and while I have a really good like easy time growing basil, I find that it's one I need to reseed more often. Kind of the same with cilantro. You can grow cilantro inside, but I find that after a while it kind of gets a little bit woody. The stems get a little woody. It doesn't produce quite as much, so I'll just reseed after a little while. Erin, you should look at these seeds. Want to see something neat? Like a huge oregano plant grows from like that.
Wow.
I know.
It's like dirt.
It's tiny. Uh-oh. Yeah, I put this in the right spot. Whew. That's why labeling is so important. You think you will remember where you put stuff. At least for me, I don't remember. Our last one is sage. So now that all the seeds are planted, we just need to water them in, and we just need to do it lightly because the soil has already been pre-moistened. It makes it so nice. And you'll want to use a water bottle or a pump sprayer. I have a pump sprayer. Let me show you mine. This is what I use when I need to get serious, except for I just realized I need to replace it because I think I'm missing a piece that helps the pressure build up in there. Anyway, you just want to do the watering in a very light, gentle manner, so that you're just settling the seeds, but you're not dislodging them on accident. That can happen really easy with like a watering can. So that is it for today in terms of planting. We're gonna put the dome over the top, and then I'm going to position it in the grow light. Okay, and like I said, I'm gonna be using a seedling heat mat. So I'm gonna place that down here first. Look at how perfectly that fits. That makes me happy. And then I'm going to place my seed tray directly on top of the seedling heat mat. And then once my plants have grown up a little bit, then I will put them on the self-watering tray. And I'm going to go ahead and place the basil up here as well. The heat will be totally fine. It's very gentle, and basil really appreciates any extra heat. So let's turn this on. This is the mini bamboo LED grow light garden from Gardener Supply, and it's a really nice size to put on a kitchen counter because it's so compact. And it's not meant to house a ton of different things, and that's not what my goal is. In the end, I want one of each type of herb that I planted today, and then I'll be giving the rest of the starts away, but I would love just to have a little collection of terracotta pots in here full of herbs. Technically, do not have to have your grow light on if you're just starting seeds until the seeds are up, until you can start seeing a little bit of green come out of the soil. That's the point where you want to turn on your light. But I'm going to be keeping my basil plant in this unit, and so I'm going to just leave it on, and it won't hurt anything in terms of the seeds. So the potting and planting is probably the most involved thing at this point. So the rest of the things I want to talk about, the rest of the tips will go pretty quickly. The next one is temperature, and most herbs just like the temperatures we're comfortable in. So typically they're very happy inside. You can even put them up a little bit closer to a windowsill than most other houseplants prefer. You don't want the leaves directly touching the window, like the glass, because it can cool off quite significantly, especially like the heat lovers like basil, but you can have them up pretty darn close and they stay happy because they don't mind a little bit of cool temps as well. And in terms of watering, of course, it's going to be different based on whether or not it's a pre-grown plant or if you're starting seeds. I will be checking on the seed tray every single day. I notice that when I have my dome on it, it stays wet for a lot longer, and sometimes I can skip complete days. I think number one way to maybe not have success when you're starting seeds is to keep them too wet. You don't want them to dry out, but you just want to monitor that moisture level, and then I'll just use the spray bottle when I see that it's looking like it needs a little bit more water. And then for our potted plant, for most herbs, you'll want to keep the soil lightly moist, never soggy, hardly ever completely dried out. In fact, I've seen on so many guides where it says to let like your rosemary plant, like your Mediterranean type herbs, dry out completely between waterings, and it just, in our dry climate, it does not work. I have to keep it pretty moist to keep them happy. Of course, that's completely environmental. I mean, if you live in a more humid environment, just overall, you probably will have to water a lot less than I do where it's so dry. It also depends on where you have it placed in your house. If you have it near a window or if you have it near an air register, that's drying things out quicker. Also, terracotta dries out quicker than other containers, other types of containers, so keep that in mind. Watering is just one of those things you have to monitor. And then in terms of fertilizing, it's very easy. I usually do an every 2-week schedule for fertilizing, and I will use pretty much whatever I have on hand. This is what I have on hand right now. There's an indoor, this is just a straight up houseplant food, and then I've got the grow right here. Both of these work really well. I just follow the directions on the back, which says add 2 to 3 doses per gallon of water. And so I do that every 2 weeks. Of course, I don't mix up a whole gallon of water because I don't need that much, but you can kind of just meter it out depending on what you're watering, how many things you have to water. And the last thing is pruning, which we keep our plants looking full and dense and nicer for a lot longer if we keep them nicely pruned. The whole point of having herbs inside, though, is to be pruning on them so we can be utilizing them with our meals, cooking with them, eating them. So it should be kind of a regular practice anyway. But like right here, to prune your basil plant, if you come down the stem, the main stem right here, you'll see where these 2 larger leaves connect. That's called a node. And then you can see 2 more sets coming out from in between those larger leaves and the main stem. If I cut right here, that will enable 2 extra branches to grow, and those were starting to grow anyway, and it'll do some of that on its own. But the more you do that, the more it has a chance to grow lateral branches rather than trying to keep growing up, and it'll just create a nicer shaped plant in the end. Boy, that smells good. But I don't really want to prune anymore on this one. Not right now, it doesn't need it. You know what, and the last thing I forgot to mention is airflow. You do want to make sure when you are packing your plants into an area or into a grow light system or whatever, that you keep proper amount of airflow around each plant. In fact, if you have it in an area where you have like a fan, an oscillating fan going by, that's always really helpful, especially in cases like marjoram, oregano. They can tend to mildew a little bit. And so if you've got good airflow and they can maintain less moisture around their leaf canopy, that's the best way to go. So just keep that in mind too. And that's why I only want to end up with one of each one of these, because I would never have enough room for this many plants in this little system. And that's pretty much it, you guys. I was just so excited and anxious to get these herb seeds started. It kind of feels like almost the kickoff to a new gardening year to get something like this going. And I'm hoping to update you all later on. I'm going to move this into our kitchen today and I'll get it plugged in, and so the heat mat will be going, and then hopefully in maybe a couple of weeks, we'll have complete germination on these. They all vary in germination time, but they're close enough. I think in a couple weeks, we'll be able to give you an update. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next video.